Okay, today we're going to be talking about what we know about what works to keep young men out of jail. In the juvenile justice system, which is the system for people who are under legal age, it's estimated there are between 100 and 200,000 young people in the United States. But if we look at people under the age of 21, the number is something more like 800,000 in any given year pass through the juvenile or criminal justice system. And I think it matters because what we know is that being detained puts a lifetime mark on someone. It makes it harder for them to finish school, harder for them to get a job, increases the likelihood that they'll end up back behind bars. So that if we can find out ways to lock up fewer young people, we'll be giving a benefit to them and to the larger society, especially if we can find ways that are equally or more effective in protecting public safety and reducing crime and violence. First of all, I think we lock up too many people. I think it should be the last resort rather than the first resort. And unfortunately, in the last 20, 30 years, it's too often become our solution to every social problem is to lock up people, and especially young people, and especially young people of color, Black and Latino young people. I think if we were to find more effective ways to prevent and deter crime than locking people up, it would have far fewer adverse consequences, both on the young people who are incarcerated and on communities and society as a whole. Well, I think we need to look at different points along the continuum, and the most promising and effective strategies are the ones that actually prevent people from getting in trouble in the first place. A good place to start there would be to improve our schools. In the New York City schools, as in many other large jurisdictions, somewhere between 40 and 50% of young people who enter school don't graduate. And that's just a tremendous waste. And a young person who's not in school is at much higher risk of getting in trouble and ending up in a detention facility. So that's the first thing. We need to make schools do better at holding on to young people and making them engaged and invested in their education. Second, many people who end up in juvenile or adult detention facilities have mental health or substance abuse problems. And our mental health and substance abuse systems are inadequate overall, but especially inadequate in dealing with the problems of young people. And so improving those services would also be a step forward. A third area is to look at our policing practices. In New York and in many parts of the country, we're really arresting tens of thousands of young people for minor violations, for possession or sales of marijuana, for jumping turnstiles. And I think there's not good evidence that locking up people who commit those crimes protects public safety or prevents or deters future crime. And so I think we need to look to alternatives to incarceration for low-level offenders. And then if we reserve detention for the people who have committed the most serious crimes, then we'll have more resources to actually make it an experience that can rehabilitate people. And I think the vast majority of people who end up in detention with proper services that help them to finish their education, prepare for jobs, address mental health and substance abuse issues, will have better outcomes if we do those things. So I think those are some of the steps that New York City could take. So by reentry programs, we mean programs that prepare people who are in detention for release and to prepare them to return to their communities in a way that they're better able to take care of themselves, the people they care about, and less likely to end up back inside. And I think we know, first of all, that preparation for reentry needs to start the moment someone steps into a facility. It's not something you wait for the last day. That second, the more the time inside can be spent getting connected back to education, preparing young people for work, helping them to address the family, mental health, and substance abuse issues, the more likely they'll be able to follow up when they get out. I think a third characteristic of effective programs is they there's continuity between what happens inside the facility and what happens after release. And I think another characteristic of effective programs is they realize young people coming out of detention, like all young people, sometimes make mistakes, and sometimes they go back to their old ways, and so we need safety nets and second chances. Yes, consequences for breaking the law or violating terms of parole, but not such serious consequences that they set people on a worse path than they were on to begin with. Real Men was a reentry program in the New York City jail at Rikers Island, funded by the National Institute of Drug Abuse. And we were trying to see if developing a short-term program for young men would help them to reduce drug use, avoid risky sexual behavior, and reduce reincarceration. It was a randomized trial. We enrolled people, and some people got the full program and other people got a single session helping them to prepare for their release. And I think the starting premise of Real Men was that young men in New York City face some tough choices about deciding how to be a man, how to grow up. And we wanted to engage the guys in jail in a discussion about what were some paths to manhood and what were the consequences of taking one path or another, both for themselves and their futures and the people they cared about. And so we hoped that the path that some of them had chosen, which was to be to engage in violence, to engage in crime, to sell drugs, that they might consider other paths and that we would provide some support for that. We worked with a youth-serving organization so that once people got out, they could connect back to school, job training for those who needed it, substance abuse treatment, and that we were trying to see if providing this range of services both inside the jail and once people got out would lead to improvements. And what we found is that this program had some modest positive effects, that those people who went through the full program had fewer substance abuse problems, they spent less time in jail, and they were more likely to be connected to work and school than young people who didn't get the program. But still, we found that those young men who had been part of our program had relatively high rates of rearrest and relatively high rates of drug use. And the conclusion we drew from that is that programs like ours were necessary but not sufficient. And we also had to look at changing some of the policies that made it so hard for young people coming out of jail to find the supports that would keep them out of trouble. And those supports include being able to find mental health and substance abuse services that are accessible and affordable, being able to find job training in a job that pays a living wage, and being able to get back into school and have schools welcome them back if they agreed to live by the rules of the school rather than try and keep them out. And I think until we develop policies that put those supports in place, that many young people who go through our detention facilities are going to end up back inside time after time. And that's really a very high price we pay as a society. It's incredibly expensive to lock people up in jail. And it also is a moral failing. Dostoevsky said we judge a society by how they treat their prisoners. And by that measure, we're not doing very well.